I never thought I'd be the kind of man who questioned his own reality. I prided myself on being observant, grounded, someone who could read between the lines. But life has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. That morning began like any other. The alarm buzzed at 6:30, and I reached over to turn it off before it woke Rachel. She stirred slightly but didn't open her eyes. For a moment, I watched her sleep. The steady rise and fall of her chest, the way her hair fanned out across the pillow. There was a time when this simple act felt intimate, sacred even. Now, it just felt ordinary. Rachel had an early meeting that day, a big presentation she'd been preparing for weeks. She groaned as the second alarm went off, reluctantly dragging herself out of bed. "You don't have to get up," she muttered, already halfway to the bathroom. "I know," I replied, though I did anyway. The truth was, I liked watching her routine. It gave me a sense of order in a world that often felt chaotic. She showered, dressed in one of her tailored suits, and applied makeup with precision. By 7:30, she was downstairs, sipping coffee while scrolling through emails on her phone. "You'll do great today," I said, leaning against the doorway. She glanced up briefly, offering a tight smile. "Thanks. I hope so." Her tone was clipped, distracted. Not unusual for her on days like this, but still, it stung. I wanted to ask if something was wrong, if there was anything I could do to help. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded and retreated to the living room, where I pretended to focus on the book I'd been reading. When Rachel finally left for work, I felt a strange emptiness settle over the house. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed it, but today, it felt heavier somehow. Maybe it was the way she'd rushed out without saying goodbye properly. Or maybe it was the nagging feeling I couldn't shake, that something about her behavior lately didn't quite add up. I told myself I was overthinking things. Rachel was busy. She always had been. Her job demanded a lot from her, and I understood that. Still, as I wandered aimlessly around the house, I couldn't shake the unease building in the pit of my stomach. Little did I know, by the end of the day, I'd have answers to questions I hadn't even dared to ask. And those answers would change everything. The hours after Rachel left dragged on slower than usual. I tried to distract myself by writing, but the words refused to come. My mind kept drifting back to the subtle changes I'd noticed in her over the past few months, changes I had dismissed as stress or fatigue. She'd been working late more often, her phone always close at hand, even during dinner. Sometimes, she'd pause mid-conversation, her eyes darting toward the screen as if waiting for something, or someone, to interrupt. At first, I chalked it up to the demands of her job. Marketing directors don't climb the corporate ladder without sacrifice, and Rachel was nothing if not ambitious. But now, sitting alone in the quiet house, those excuses felt flimsy, like a poorly constructed wall ready to crumble under scrutiny. Around noon, I decided to visit Rachel's office. It wasn't unusual for me to drop by with lunch when she had a big day ahead. She'd appreciate the gesture, I thought, and maybe it would ease some of the tension between us. Besides, I needed to see her, to reassure myself that everything was fine. When I arrived at her building, the lobby buzzed with activity. Employees hurried past me, clutching folders and cups of coffee. I nodded politely to the security guard, who recognized me from previous visits, and made my way to the elevators. Rachel's floor was quieter, more subdued. Most people were either in meetings or at their desks, heads bent over computers. I spotted her assistant, Lisa, typing furiously at her desk outside Rachel's office. "Hey, Lisa," I said, forcing a casual smile. "Is Rachel free? I brought her lunch." Lisa glanced up, looking surprised but pleased. "Oh, hi, Mr. Carter. That's so sweet of you. Let me check." She tapped lightly on Rachel's door before poking her head inside. After a moment, she turned back to me. "She's on a call right now, but she should be wrapping up soon. You can wait in her office if you'd like." I hesitated. Waiting in Rachel's office wasn't something I did often. It felt too formal, too much like trespassing. But today, I nodded. "Sure. Thanks." The office smelled faintly of lavender, just like Rachel's favorite lotion. Her desk was immaculate, as always. Papers neatly stacked, pens aligned perfectly in a cup, a framed photo of us from our wedding day sitting off to one side. Everything looked exactly as it should. But then I saw it. Her laptop was open, the screen glowing softly. A document was pulled up, a string of messages exchanged between her and someone whose name I didn't recognize. At first glance, they seemed innocuous enough. Updates about work projects, comments on upcoming deadlines. But as my eyes scanned further down, the tone shifted. I can't stop thinking about last night. My breath caught in my throat. You have no idea how hard it is to focus when all I want is to hear your voice. My hands trembled as I leaned closer, my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't professional correspondence. This wasn't friendly banter. These were words filled with longing, intimacy, the kind of connection I hadn't felt from Rachel in what felt like years. And then I saw his name signed at the bottom of one message. Ethan. The room spun. My chest tightened, each heartbeat echoing like thunder. I wanted to close the laptop, to pretend I hadn't seen any of it. But I couldn't look away. Every word carved deeper into my mind, unraveling the life I thought we shared. Mr. Carter? Lisa's voice startled me, and I quickly stepped back from the desk. I stammered, my face burning. I think I'll wait outside. She gave me a curious look but didn't press. As I stumbled out of the office, my thoughts raced. Who was Ethan? How long had this been going on? And why hadn't I seen it sooner? By the time Rachel emerged from her meeting, smiling brightly as though nothing was wrong, I was already gone. I don't remember the drive home. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but the road ahead was a blur. All I could see were those words, those damning, soul-crushing words, burned into my mind like a brand. I can't stop thinking about last night. Over and over, they played in an endless loop, each repetition slicing deeper into whatever fragile trust remained between us. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I sat there for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the house we'd built together. It wasn't just a home. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where love and loyalty lived. Now, it felt hollow, tainted. Every room held memories of her laughter, her touch, her promises. And now, every memory felt like a lie. I walked inside, my footsteps heavy, as if weighed down by invisible chains. The silence of the empty house pressed against me, suffocating. For the first time in years, I wished someone else were here. Anyone. To tell me this wasn't real, that I'd imagined it all. But no one was coming. There was only me and the truth I couldn't escape. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I lost track. When Rachel finally came home, she breezed through the door with the same practiced ease she always did after a long day. Her heels clicked against the tile floor as she set her bag on the counter. "You're quiet," she said, glancing at me. "Everything okay?" Her voice sounded normal, cheerful even. How could she stand there, looking so calm, when my world had been ripped apart? Did she not feel the weight of what she'd done? Or worse, did she think she'd gotten away with it? "I went to your office today," I said, my voice low, almost unrecognizable. She froze, her hand hovering midair above the stack of mail. For a split second, panic flickered across her face, but she quickly masked it with confusion. "You did? Why?" "To bring you lunch," I replied, taking a step closer. "But Lisa said you were on a call, so I waited inside." Her eyes darted toward the doorway, as if calculating how quickly she could leave. "That was nice of you," she said carefully. "Did you wait long?" "Long enough." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and final. She swallowed hard, her composure beginning to crack. "What are you talking about?" "The laptop, Rachel," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "It was open. I saw the messages." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, clearly scrambling for an explanation. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by lying. Who is Ethan?" The name hit her like a punch to the gut. She staggered back slightly, clutching the edge of the counter for support. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then tell me what it is." I shouted, my anger boiling over. Because from where I'm standing, It looks like you've been carrying on some kind of affair behind my back. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. This woman, the woman I'd loved, trusted, devoted my life to, was a stranger. Everything I thought I knew about her had been a facade. It started months ago, she admitted finally, her voice trembling. After the promotion, things got stressful and Ethan, he understood me. He listened. You've been so distant lately, and Her words trailed off, but they didn't need to continue. I already knew the rest. She hadn't just betrayed me physically. She'd abandoned us emotionally long before that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her quiet sobs. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to unleash the storm raging inside me. But instead, I felt nothing. Just cold, empty rage. You should go, I said flatly. What? She asked, her voice barely audible. Leave. Pack a bag and get out. I can't look at you right now. She stared at me, stunned, as if she hadn't expected me to react this way. Maybe she thought I'd beg her to stay, to forgive her. But forgiveness wasn't an option. Not tonight, not ever. Without another word, she turned and disappeared upstairs. Moments later, I heard the faint rustle of clothes being thrown into a suitcase. As I stood there in the wreckage of our marriage, a single thought consumed me. She would regret this. Whatever fleeting comfort she'd found in Ethan's arms wouldn't compare to the pain I intended to inflict. Betrayal demands retribution, and I would make sure she paid dearly. The days that followed were a blur of anger and icy resolve. Rachel didn't return home after leaving that night, and I didn't try to reach out. A part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers or explanations, but another part, the colder, darker part, knew better. Confrontation wouldn't undo what had been done. Words wouldn't heal the wounds she'd inflicted. No, this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about justice. I spent hours sitting in silence, staring at the walls of the house we'd once shared. Each room felt tainted now, every corner holding echoes of her betrayal. But instead of succumbing to despair, I focused on planning. Every detail mattered. Every move needed precision. If Rachel thought she could walk away unscathed, she was wrong. My first step was gathering information. I accessed her email account, a password she'd carelessly left saved on our shared computer, and began piecing together fragments of her secret life. There were dozens of messages between her and Ethan, some casual, others painfully intimate. They spoke of stolen moments during lunch breaks, late-night phone calls, even plans for weekends away under the guise of work trips. What struck me most was how calculated it all seemed. She hadn't acted impulsively. She'd planned everything meticulously, ensuring no one suspected a thing. Even the timing of her absences made sense now. The excuses about working late, the sudden trips out of town. All lies. But there was one message that stood out among the rest. Dated just 2 weeks prior, it contained a single line from Ethan. Let's make it official. Leave him. Leave me. The words burned like acid, searing themselves into my mind. So this wasn't just a fleeting affair. It was a full-blown relationship, complete with promises of a future together. And Rachel? She hadn't denied it. I printed out every message, every incriminating piece of evidence, and stored them in a folder I kept locked in my desk drawer. These weren't just records of her betrayal. They were ammunition. Next, I turned my attention to Ethan. Who was he? What did he have that I didn't? A quick search revealed he worked in IT at Rachel's company, a tech specialist who likely fixed her computer issues while whispering sweet nothings in her ear. His social media profiles painted the picture of an ordinary man. Mid-30s, clean-cut, with a penchant for hiking and craft beer. Nothing remarkable. Nothing worth destroying someone's marriage over. And yet, here we were. I considered confronting him directly, showing up at his apartment, perhaps, or sending an anonymous email with screenshots of their correspondence, but something held me back. That would be too easy, too predictable. If I wanted revenge, it had to be more than just exposing their secret. It had to hurt. So I waited, watched, bided my time until the perfect opportunity presented itself. In the meantime, I threw myself into mundane tasks around the house, using routine as a shield against the storm raging inside me. I cleaned closets, organized drawers, repainted the guest bedroom. All things Rachel had always nagged me to do. Each stroke of the paintbrush felt cathartic, as if I were erasing her presence from our lives one layer at a time. Neighbors noticed the change in me, of course. Mrs. Henderson from next door stopped by one afternoon with a casserole and concerned questions. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked, peering at me over her glasses. "Fine," I replied curtly, forcing a smile. "Just taking advantage of some alone time." She nodded sympathetically, but lingered a moment longer than necessary before leaving. I knew the gossip mill would start turning soon enough. Let them talk. By the time they realized what was happening, it would already be too late. One evening, as I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, a knock at the door startled me. For a brief, irrational moment, I thought it might be Rachel, coming back to beg forgiveness or explain herself. Instead, it was Lisa, Rachel's assistant. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said nervously, clutching her purse straps tightly. "I heard about, well, everything. Are you okay?" Her concern caught me off guard. Lisa had always been polite but distant, the kind of person who kept professional boundaries firmly intact. Yet here she was, standing on my doorstep, looking genuinely worried. "I'm fine," I lied, stepping aside to let her in. We sat awkwardly in the kitchen, sipping tea she'd brought with her. She hesitated before speaking again. "Look, I know this is none of my business, but Rachel hasn't exactly been discreet lately. People at work are starting to notice." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "She's been spending a lot of time with Ethan," Lisa admitted quietly. "They think it's innocent, just co-workers bonding, but I've seen the way they look at each other. It's not hard to put two and two together." Her words confirmed what I already knew, but hearing them aloud still stung. "Thanks for telling me," I said stiffly. "I just thought you deserved to know," she replied, standing to leave. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened to you." After she left, I sat in the quiet house, letting her words sink in. Sorry. Everyone would be sorry eventually, not because they cared about me, but because they'd see the fallout of what I was about to unleash. Because revenge isn't just about hurting the ones who wronged you. It's about making sure they never forget why they deserved it. And I intended to make sure Rachel and Ethan remembered every second of it. The days turned into weeks, and my resolve hardened with each passing moment. I became a man possessed, not by rage, but by an icy determination that left no room for doubt or hesitation. Revenge wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a blueprint, a carefully constructed plan designed to dismantle everything Rachel held dear. I started small, testing the waters to see how far I could push without raising suspicion. My first move was simple yet effective. I sent an anonymous email to Rachel's boss, attaching a few select screenshots of her exchanges with Ethan. The message was brief and to the point. "You might want to look into this." Within hours, rumors began swirling at her office. Whispers echoed through the hallways as colleagues speculated about the nature of Rachel's relationship with Ethan. Some dismissed it as gossip, while others took it more seriously, questioning whether their behavior violated company policy. Either way, the seed had been planted. Rachel called me that evening, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I didn't do anything," I replied coolly. "But maybe you should have thought about the consequences before getting involved with someone at work." "You have no right." "No right?" I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You lost the right to privacy when you decided to cheat on me. Don't call me again unless you're ready to face what you've done." She hung up without another word, but I could hear the panic in her breathing before the line went dead. Good. Let her feel the weight of her actions. Let her realize there's no escaping accountability. With the workplace drama simmering, I shifted my focus to Ethan. If Rachel was the architect of our marriage's collapse, then he was the wrecking ball, and I intended to bring him down piece by piece. Using the information I'd gathered from Rachel's emails, I created a fake social media profile under the guise of a young professional named Emma. Her profile picture was nondescript, a stock photo of a smiling woman, and her bio hinted at a successful career in marketing. It didn't take long for Emma to catch Ethan's attention. He accepted her friend request within minutes, likely drawn in by her polished appearance and vague similarities to Rachel. We exchanged polite messages at first, nothing too personal, but soon, Emma began dropping subtle hints about being newly single and looking for companionship. Ethan took the bait. Their conversations grew flirtatious, with him sharing stories about his own struggles and relationships. He spoke candidly about feeling trapped in a loveless marriage, a lie, since he wasn't married, and confessed that he'd recently ended things with someone special, someone who didn't understand him. Reading those words made my blood boil, but I kept my emotions in check. This wasn't about satisfying my anger. It was about dismantling his life as thoroughly as he'd helped dismantle mine. When the timing felt right, Emma suggested meeting in person. Ethan hesitated at first, citing concerns about mixing work and personal life, but eventually agreed. They planned to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, a location I chose specifically because it was close to Rachel's office. The day of their meeting, I arrived early, positioning myself at a table near the window where I could observe without being noticed. When Ethan walked in, he scanned the room nervously, clearly unsure what to expect. Moments later, Emma appeared, or rather, a hired actress playing the role of Emma. She was perfect, confident, charming, and completely believable. Watching them interact was surreal. Ethan leaned in close, laughing at her jokes and brushing his hand against hers as if they'd known each other for years. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was falling for the same manipulative tactics he'd used to win Rachel over. Karma, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. After their coffee date, Emma texted me, hooked. What's next? Next came phase 2 of my plan, exposing him. Using the photos and details from their encounter, I crafted a dossier detailing Ethan's infidelity, not with Rachel, but with Emma. I included timestamps, locations, and even snippets of their conversation, making sure every detail was irrefutable. Then, I sent copies to his wife. Yes, he was married, his boss, and several key figures at his company. By morning, the fallout was inevitable. The explosion came faster than I anticipated. By mid-morning, Ethan's world was unraveling in spectacular fashion. His wife filed for separation within hours of receiving the dossier, citing irreconcilable differences and demanding full custody of their children. Meanwhile, his boss called him into an emergency meeting, where he was placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into his conduct both personally and professionally. Rachel, too, found herself embroiled in the chaos. The anonymous email I'd sent to her boss had triggered a formal inquiry into her relationship with Ethan. Colleagues who once admired her now whispered behind her back, questioning her judgment and integrity. Her carefully constructed image as a dedicated professional crumbled under the weight of scandal. I watched it all unfold from afar, savoring each moment of their descent. It wasn't enough that they suffered privately. I wanted them exposed, humiliated, stripped of everything they valued. Only then would justice be served. But my satisfaction was short-lived. As the days passed, cracks began forming in my own facade. Friends and neighbors grew increasingly concerned about my behavior. Mrs. Henderson stopped by again, this time with a basket of muffins and probing questions. "You seem different," she said cautiously. "Are you sure you're handling all of this okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just taking some time to focus on myself." She didn't look convinced but didn't press further. Instead, she left me with a card for a local therapist, urging me to call if I needed someone to talk to. I tossed the card into the trash as soon as she left, dismissing the idea outright. Therapy wouldn't fix what was broken inside me, not when revenge still coursed through my veins like venom. One evening, as I scrolled through news articles detailing Ethan's downfall, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a message from Rachel. "We need to talk." My fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to respond. Finally, I typed back, "About what?" "This isn't fair," she wrote. "You're ruining lives, including yours." Her audacity infuriated me. How dare she lecture me about fairness after everything she'd done? Still, curiosity got the better of me. "Meet me tomorrow at noon," I replied. "The park near the lake." The next day, I arrived at the park early, choosing a bench overlooking the water. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Despite the beauty surrounding me, I felt nothing. No peace, no solace, only the cold emptiness that had become my constant companion. Rachel appeared shortly after noon, her face pale and drawn. She hesitated before sitting beside me, keeping a noticeable distance between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You've gone too far," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Too far?" I repeated, turning to face her. "You destroyed our marriage, Rachel. You betrayed me in every way possible. And now you have the nerve to tell me I've gone too far?" "I made a mistake," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "A terrible, selfish mistake. But this, what you're doing, it's not who you are. You're better than this." "Am I?" I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Because the man I used to be wouldn't recognize the person I've become. That man trusted you. He loved you. And you threw it all away for some IT guy who doesn't even deserve your time." "It wasn't just about him," she shot back, her voice rising. "It was about us. About how distant you've been, how disconnected we've become. I needed someone who listened, who cared. And yes, I messed up. But you can't keep punishing me like this." Her words struck a nerve, forcing me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding. Had I contributed to the breakdown of our marriage? Had my own neglect driven her into another man's arms? No. I refused to accept that narrative. Whatever flaws existed in our relationship, they didn't justify her betrayal. "I'm not punishing you," I said coldly. "I'm holding you accountable. If you wanted out, you should have ended things honestly instead of lying and sneaking around." "And what about you?" she countered. "What happens when this is over? When everyone knows what you've done? Do you think you'll feel better then?" Her question lingered in the air, unsettling me more than I cared to admit. Would I feel better? Or would I simply be left with the wreckage of my own making? Before I could respond, she stood abruptly, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I hope someday you find peace," she said softly. "But this path you're on, it won't lead you there." With that, she walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. In the days following our confrontation, doubt crept into my mind like a shadow. Rachel's words haunted me, echoing in the quiet moments when I allowed myself to reflect. Was I truly seeking justice, or was I consumed by bitterness and vengeance? The answer eluded me. Meanwhile, the fallout continued. Ethan's career imploded as the investigation revealed additional misconduct unrelated to his affair with Rachel. He was fired and publicly disgraced, his reputation in tatters. Rachel, though spared termination, resigned from her position, unable to bear the scrutiny any longer. Yet, despite their suffering, I felt no sense of closure. Each victory left me emptier than before, as if the void inside me expanded with every act of retribution. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the living room and opened the folder containing the evidence of Rachel's betrayal. The messages stared back at me, their words as sharp and painful as ever. I flipped through them absently, searching for something, anything, that might justify my actions. Instead, I found clarity. Revenge hadn't healed me. It hadn't erased the pain or restored what I'd lost. All it had done was perpetuate a cycle of destruction, leaving scars on everyone involved, including myself. For the first time in months, I cried. Not out of anger or grief, but out of sheer exhaustion. I was tired of hating, tired of hurting, tired of being the man I'd become. And so, I made a decision. The next morning, I drove to the lake where Rachel and I had spent countless weekends during happier times. The water shimmered under the sunlight, its surface calm and inviting. Sitting on the dock, I let the memories wash over me. The laughter, the shared dreams, the love that had once defined us. I called Rachel. When she answered, her voice was guarded. "What do you want?" "To apologize," I said simply. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "For what?" "For everything," I admitted. "For letting my anger consume me. For trying to destroy you and Ethan instead of facing the truth about us. I thought revenge would make me whole again, but it only made things worse." Another pause, followed by a shaky breath. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm done," I replied. "Done fighting. Done hating. I don't want to live like this anymore." She didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, I feared she'd hang up. But then she spoke, her voice soft and uncertain. I hurt you, more than I can ever make up for. But I never wanted to lose you completely. I know, I said, closing my eyes. And maybe someday, we can figure out how to move forward. Together or apart, I don't know yet. But for now, I just needed to say I'm sorry. Thank you, she whispered. We ended the call without discussing specifics. There was no grand resolution, no promise of reconciliation. Just two broken people acknowledging their mistakes and taking the first step toward healing. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to change. I sold the house Rachel and I had shared, using the money to buy a small cabin by the lake. It was modest but peaceful, a place where I could write and reflect without the ghosts of the past haunting me. Rachel moved to another city, starting fresh in a new job and a new chapter of her life. We stayed in touch sporadically, exchanging emails and occasional phone calls. There was no animosity between us, only a mutual understanding that forgiveness takes time. As for Ethan, I never heard from him again. Whether he rebuilt his life or remained trapped in the ruins of his choices, I couldn't say, and ultimately, it didn't matter. My journey wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. One crisp autumn morning, as I sat on the porch of my cabin watching the sun rise over the water, I realized something profound. Revenge may have been my initial reaction, but redemption became my ultimate goal. The scars of betrayal would always remain, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they served as reminders of the resilience required to rebuild, not just a life, but a soul. And for the first time in years, I felt hopeful.